My name is Rebecca Meckelburg. My research interests as a scholar actually date back to my experience as a social activist in the 1980s and 1990s, when I became interested and paid a lot of attention to social injustice, particularly in the post-colonial countries, who went through a process of decolonisation and independence somewhere between the 1940s and the 1960s. Also, as a social activist, I paid a lot of attention to the social position of women, not just in the former colonial countries, but also in my home country of Australia, and also of women in other developed or northern countries. In particular, how women lacked access to social resources, to employment, and were often considered to be what we refer to then as second-class citizens. I think one of the things about being an activist in a country like Australia is that I came from a country that has privilege. Also, we see this case in countries in Europe and in the United States. Indonesia is Australia's closest neighbour. So in the context of looking at the experience of countries in the process of decolonisation, Indonesia became a specific interest of mine. In the 1990s, I collaborated and engaged with many social activists from Indonesia who were involved in the anti-dictatorship struggle or in the struggle for democracy in Indonesia, and also with activists from what is now called Timor-Leste, which in 1975 had been annexed by Indonesia. So these were the experiences that brought me to become particularly focused and interested in Indonesia. But it wasn't until I came to Indonesia in the early 2000s, 2001, and then to stay for an extended period in 2002, that I decided to direct my energies more in the academic area. And in 1998, Indonesia had just experienced a process of the end of a dictatorship and entered a period of political and social change. And so in this context, when I first started to live here, my attention was drawn to post-authoritarian experiences of democratization. And in particular, I was interested in the plight or the role of ordinary people, the little people. In Indonesia, we refer to them as rakyat, and very interested in the way that they organize what I refer to in my research as non-elite forms of political organization. In terms of my research, what has really motivated me to continue my focus up until now, particularly on these non-elite forms of political organisation initiated and developed by ordinary people, is the belief that we can make a better world. And I've had the privilege and the opportunity to witness that ordinary people have the capacity to be key stakeholders in shaping progressive change. So that's why up until now, my research focus has been very much on this question of non-elite forms of political organisation that go beyond the traditional institutions that we focus on in research in political science, which is on parliament and parties and state institutions, and look more at how ordinary people are engaged in their own social and political projects, their own social and political struggles in this effort to make a better world for themselves and their families. Okay, so my current research flows on from my doctoral study, which looked at the question of the political action of ordinary rural people in the post-dictatorship period. My interest has been in particular since the Jokowi government was first elected in 2014 and then again for a second period in 2019, on how different state institutions have played a role in shaping how people in Indonesia have access to land and its associated resources, in particular water. And so in my current project, looking at the situation of local communities around the major lake of what we call Rawopening, looking at some of the social conflicts that have emerged in terms of who gets to decide who has access, who gets to use those resources, but also who has resources to develop their livelihoods from from those local resources. My other current research has been developing theory and concepts explaining how gender has been constructed in Southeast Asia, with focus on a particular empirical case that I became interested in during the COVID-19 pandemic, where I looked at local responses by governments to the pandemic seemed to be much better than what attention the national government was paying to responding to the COVID pandemic. But then when I started to dig down into some of these local government responses, I started to witness that women were key agents in developing the local responses, not necessarily always with the authority, that is, they weren't formally assigned to the citywide task force to carry out this work, but in practice they actually led these responses. So out of this experience, looking at how in large part, both at local and national level, men were officially given responsibility and authority to make decisions, to make policy, and also decide on resource allocations in responding to the pandemic. But in reality, the people carrying out the work were largely women. I think my main goal for my research now and in the future is to really push to carve out space for research that highlights the role of ordinary people in really being actors and agents of change around their own needs and issues. I think too much of research in my area of political science focuses on political elites and their role, and so my major contribution that I hope that I can make is really to highlight and draw in other scholars into more interactive discussions about seeing the role of ordinary people in these processes of social and political change.